Is there anything in the role of the chair of the MIA that has surprised me? No, not really. The agenda is pretty full. There's still a lot to talk about. There's still more regulation. There's more thematic reviews coming from the regulator. And it's really about working closely with the regulator and closely with industry to navigate our way through that. So no real surprises, but busy. In terms of my day job, I also spread myself by being also a member of the executive committee of Quilter PLC. So that has me in London a couple of days a week, and that also is a pretty demanding role. But it's a very exciting time for our business because being part of Quilter PLC, having recently listed on the London and Johannesburg stock exchanges, we are going to be rebranding to Quilter International. No, it's something that we're hugely excited about. We already consider ourselves being part of the Quilter family. Quilter PLC is made up of 5 businesses, of which we are one. So trying to rebrand all of them in one go, we felt was a little ambitious, hence the sequencing. Well, I'm originally from Dublin, which is where I was born and raised, and my first job in Dublin was with a life insurance company called Abbey Life. And I went in there for a very brief period during the summer holidays. And that brief period turned into a slightly longer period. And after about 4 years, a colleague of mine left and moved to work with a company in a place called the Isle of Man. So I came over one weekend to visit him and to see how he was getting on. And I went back home with 4 job offers. I never came in search of a job, but the job offers found me. And one of those job offers was from a company called Eagle Star International. So I decided to come to the Isle of Man and work with Eagle Star International. I lasted about a year. I felt the Isle of Man was far too small. I'd left Dublin to go travelling the world, and it didn't feel to me like I should end my journey in the Isle of Man. So it was in London for about 3 years, working with Commercial Union. I then got talked into coming back to the Isle of Man to work once again with Eagle Star International, which I did. And that job took me to, initially we worked on a project in Buenos Aires, setting up a domestic insurance company. It then took me to the Middle East, where we were setting up a direct sales force, which today you would probably recognize as Nexus. The job then took me to Hong Kong, where I was based for 3 years. And during all of that time, the business changed ownership. Eagle Star International went from British American Financial Services, that was then ultimately bought by Zurich. So we became Zurich International. I then came back to the Isle of Man after Hong Kong and oversaw the merger of a couple of insurance companies between Eagle Star and Allied Dunbar that became British American Financial Services. And in the end, I ended up in a kind of strategy director role. And then I left the insurance industry and went into the hedge fund industry, where I spent a number of years developing the business and raising capital. And from there, I then went into the non-executive world, where I ended up on the boards of a number of companies, private equity companies, fund companies, and I also was on the board of the regulator here in the Isle of Man, the Financial Services Authority. And it was from that position that I got introduced to Old Mutual, and here we are. Yes, and I'll tell you a little known fact about me. When I started in the industry with Abbey Life, it was in an underground basement filing room. I was a filing clerk, and the room would occasionally flood because it was right on the banks of the River Liffey in central Dublin. And it was 3 weeks into that job, the post boy left, and I successfully applied for the job of post boy and got it. So I have a degree of pride that speaking to you today as the CEO of a significant international insurance company and the chair of the Insurance Association, that is a source of great pride to me, that I really have quite literally gone from the bottom to the top. But the lesson that I've learned and what I hold really dear to me is to ensure that with leadership you have humility. And by that I mean I never forget about where I came from. So every day when I come into the office, I will spend 5 to 10 minutes talking to our receptionist. And I don't do that as a chore. I do that because I genuinely want her to feel as valued to the organization as everybody else in it. So that's where my humility comes from. No, we absolutely believe in it, and I believe in it personally. I think it really does all start with advice. People often don't know they need advice. They don't necessarily understand the value of advice. But for us, it's where it all starts. Good professional financial advice, we think, is incredibly important. In fact, we think it's the most important thing. So anything that we can do to promote that to our customers and to help advisors position themselves in that place, we absolutely get behind. Without good financial advice, customers are not going to get the right outcomes. Without good financial advice, businesses like us won't exist. So we think it's hugely important that that area is supported. I think every industry has legacy. Any industry that's been around any length of time, of course, has legacy. And I'm sure we're not alone when we look back on some of the things we created, we designed, we imagined. We might not do the same things again through today's lens. An example would be probably the automotive industry. You know, when I look back at some of the output of some of the car manufacturers 20, 30 years ago, great big gas guzzling, hugely pollutant with emissions. Through today's lens, they would be considered unacceptable. But at the time, they were wholly appropriate and arguably at the very top end of design. So I think every industry has got its legacy. And although over the past 30 odd years that I've been involved in the industry, I'm tremendously proud about the innovation that the industry has come up with. I'm very proud that we have had the foresight to imagine and create and deliver solutions. I'm maybe less proud about some of the outcomes. They were not as we had planned. And that's for me the learning going forward. I want the industry in the future to absolutely ensure central to everything is good customer outcomes. And that should inform our thinking around product design, service provision, everything else. It's got to be about the customer. And I think promoting that and keeping that central in your organization is the way forward. Gary, it's been going on probably now for 3 years. So it has been a long journey for the industry and the regulator. In that 3 years, we've had quite a lot of consultation, quite a lot of rethinking of certain parts of it. But from a personal point of view, as chair of the Manx Insurance Association, I'm absolutely delighted that it's in, it's done, and it's now behind us. Why? Because it is fundamentally about improving standards. It's about focusing on better outcomes for our customers, and those things I hold very dear. So I'm delighted that it is behind us, and we can now move forward and frankly move on to the next conversation. But for the industry, I think it's been a real pivotal point. I think the international insurance industry over the past 30 odd years has had some good times and some challenging times. But I think this regulation really builds a strong platform and foundation for the next chapter of the insurance industry. I think financial advisors, certainly in the international markets, have been largely transactional based advisors. So they move from, in many respects, sale to sale. And in a world that is in very large part driven by commission payments in exchange for those sales, you can see why it's necessary for them to be transactionally focused. I think this regulation is causing advisors to rethink their business models. I think it's going to cause advisors to think about moving away from transactional and moving more into the space around the long-term relationship with the customer over their lifetime, and becoming less reliant on upfront commissions and more reliant on fees over the longer term. So I think advisors' businesses are fundamentally going to change, and many of them are already changing in that direction. I also think because there's less dependency on the transactional element, that advisors will ultimately end up doing a much better job for their customer and staying closer to their financial advice needs. We've seen this change before. We've seen it in the UK market with the Retail Distribution Review, and where commission disclosure ultimately ended up in commission ban. And of course, financial advisors in the UK, they were very concerned in the lead up to this change. But of course, looking back on it now, it's the best thing that's ever happened. And a financial advisor in the UK today is earning more from their clients than they were prior to RDR. So if I were an advisor in the international space, I would look to the learnings of the UK market as being evidence that this is a good thing, not a bad thing. Not a great deal. There's not an awful lot of time left, if I'm honest. I've recently become a slave to my schedule, and because of the amount of travel that I do, so I haven't been doing very much for me, and more importantly, I haven't been looking after me. So I've changed that. I got in touch with a guy only yesterday, and I've got my first appointment at the gym in a very long time tomorrow. So that's where I'm going to be spending any downtime that I might have. And when I'm not doing that, my passion, my love, the thing that I really enjoy is rugby, watching it. Not so much playing it these days, but watching it.